Okay, so we're right at the top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started here. My name is Brian, and I'm joined by my colleague Karsten. And today we'll be talking about security and identity management with Kerio Connect. So for the agenda today, we'll start with just a very brief and general overview of email security. And then we'll go into how security works with Kerio Connect, so securing communication. And then we'll talk about encrypting email with SMIME. Then Karsten will do the demonstration and basically just reiterate a lot of the points that I'll be talking about in the presentation and show you in a live scenario. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers at the end. And you can see there's a Q&A pod. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll address those either as we go or towards the end. So before we get into the presentation, just do a quick product overview for those of you that are new to the product. So starting off with flexible cross-platform client support. That's a big focus of Kerio Connect, having the ability to use whichever client you like, whether it's using a web browser or a desktop client such as Outlook. Secure and protected email, that's obviously the topic of today, so I won't belabor that point too much. BYOD made easy, so using whichever mobile device you like, whether it's a BlackBerry, Android, or iPhone. We support ActiveSync as well as CalDAV or CardDAV, so you can synchronize contacts, calendars, tasks, and email very easily with your mobile device. Simplicity is certainly a focus as well with Kerio Connect. For anyone that's administered the product, you'd see it's very easy to install, upgrade, manage, and then even from the end user's perspective, using the web browser or the desktop client is very intuitive, straightforward. So certainly simplicity, especially from the administrator standpoint, is something that we really focus on. On-premises deployment, so the flexibility of being able to deploy Kerio Connect on whichever OS you like. So whether it's a Windows Server platform, Mac OS, or Linux, or if you want to go virtualized, you have either option at your disposal. And cloud deployment, if you prefer not to host Kerio Connect on premises, you do have the option of hosting Kerio Connect in the cloud. We have a number of partners that offer hosting services, so that is as well an option if you perhaps don't have the infrastructure of hosting your own in-house email server. You can also choose to go with one of our hosting partners. So now let's go into email security overview. So just to start off with maybe a few quotes that you might have heard if you're an IT administrator who manages a mail system such as Kerio Connect, and of course it's usually coming from the boss. So questions such as, are we compliant? Can you guarantee that my email is private and secure? Why am I getting these SSL certificate warnings? Or just simply, how do I send an encrypted message? So hopefully throughout this presentation we'll be able to answer those questions for you. So kind of following up with those previous quotes, to address a question really of why do I need email security, just to point out some of the main reasons. Obviously compliance. So if you're hosting your own service and you do collect credit card information, hopefully not via email, but it's certainly important to make sure that you are using the latest security standards, and you probably have some specific requirements within your industry, whether it's PCI compliance or HIPAA, but making sure that all of your systems are up to date and fully patched, and you are conforming to all of the latest standards for your industry. So that's a very important consideration. Just protecting your own reputation as well is very important, making sure that you have strong passwords, that you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable to hackers that might compromise an account that has a easy to guess password, which can result in you becoming abused as a spam relay and it's very difficult for anyone that's had that circumstance to kind of repair your reputation at that point. So making sure that you have the right measures in place to prevent that type of circumstance is one of the objectives of this webinar. And then from a privacy standpoint, just making sure that you are using encryption when necessary, just to make sure that somebody is not able to obtain or read sensitive data that was perhaps unencrypted. So preventing data leakage. So these are all the reasons, some of the top high-level reasons why you obviously need email security. It's probably somewhat straightforward as to why you might need security with email, but just to sort of reemphasize some of the kind of obvious points. So now we'll go into the meat of the presentation and talk about how you can apply these concepts to Kerio Connect to make sure that you are securing your communication. So first and foremost, applying updates whenever we put out fixes to any existing or known vulnerabilities, which are going to crop up over time. It's certainly very important to make sure that you stay up to date with the latest versions of the software. So just to point out a few examples in recent history of known vulnerabilities, there's been a lot of known issues with OpenSSL, and so you'll see that a lot of them we've addressed with recent releases here in the product. So the Poodle and some cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, and then just in general, OpenSSL there was a lot of issues with that within the last year or two here. So you can see some of the updates we've applied, and then in 8.5 we really kind of did somewhat of a major overhaul of our SSL implementation, and I think it was somewhat in response to a lot of those vulnerabilities. I'd say probably the most notable enhancement there is just completely disabling SSL v3 in favor of strict TLS. And so anyone who's done the update to 8.5, which was made available in May of 2015.
And just to chime in at that point, Ryan, just to emphasize the people that they should definitely update. I've heard from our chief developer, Pavel Dobry, who is the main responsible person for Kerio Connect, that they see each day several crash reports of some of the Kerio Connects out there. And they can also be caused if you have not updated, because people try to compromise your Kerio Connect and try to use these vulnerabilities to compromise your server. So even if it's not compromised, when you do not fix it, it could maybe crash because of the overload when script kiddies are trying to compromise it. So just again to underline that it is pretty important to keep your Kerio Connect always on the latest version.
Thank Carsten. Yeah, so as well, just from the standpoint of stability, so even in addition to security, oftentimes when we resolve issues within crashes and so forth, we apply that within updated versions. So from both a security and stability standpoint, it is very advised to stay current. And to further simplify the process of updating Kerio Connect, one of the nice recent additions in the version 9, you'll see we've now added the ability to upgrade the product remotely directly through the administration interface with a single click. So that process now of updating the product is quite a bit easier. So protecting user login accounts, this is another very important piece of advice. By default, the mail server does not enforce complexity, so it's an option that is highly recommended. It's in the properties of domain. Karsten will elaborate further on this within the demonstration, but certainly this is a very important feature and should be enabled in all installations. And correct me if I'm wrong, Karsten, but I believe if you enable this option, it's not going to retroactively enforce or require people to change their passwords. So it would be wise to, after you enable this, to encourage rather users to reset their password just to make sure that it's going to be complex.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right, Brian. We just tested it yesterday when we prepared this webinar, and I was pretty frightened if my login still will work. You should definitely advise your customers and your users to change the password when you activate the password complexity, otherwise it's useless.
And then another very important option is to enable login guessing protection. And again, both of these options, Karsten, will go through in the demonstration. But that feature will prevent from brute force attacks. So after, I believe it's 5 failed login attempts, the user will be locked out, or their IP address rather would be locked out for I believe it's 1 hour. And then as well, Center Anti-Spoofing Protection is another important security feature to make sure that somebody cannot spoof a local user within the mail system. So enforcing secure communication, another very important security feature, which is just a toggle menu within the administration. As well, just as a secondary measure, you might want to disable any of the insecure services. So if you're not going to use it, turn it off as general good security advice, even though probably it's sitting behind a firewall and you wouldn't open those ports anyways. But if you're not going to be supporting an insecure connection, might as well just turn off the service altogether. And again, that's something Karsten will show in the demonstration. There's also an option to require encrypted connections. One caveat, which I'm not sure, Karsten, you can maybe show in the demo, but if you leave the HTTP service on unencrypted, what will happen if the user tries to connect, it will actually force a redirect to the secure version, which can be somewhat helpful for users. I know even for myself, sometimes typing in https:// especially from a mobile device, can be kind of cumbersome. So it's nice to have that convenience of redirecting the user to the secure version of the web interface. Also, as Karsten will show in the demo, the standard insecure SMTP does need to remain open, just because a lot of incoming email may not use SSL, and that's something that we just can't control. So it's better just to ensure that you will in fact receive the message than to be outright denying a good percentage of incoming email simply because they can't use SSL. And of course, if you're going to be enforcing secure communication, it's very important to make sure that you've got a valid, trusted SSL certificate, and it's certainly becoming more and more important, especially as browsers are making it more and more kind of annoying for users if they're connecting to a site that does not have a trusted certificate. And even some applications I've seen on mobile devices simply won't even allow connections to sites that don't have a validated or trusted SSL certificate. So here's just a quick screenshot here, and again, Karsten will show in the demo, but this is the services. You see several of them disable basically the insecure versions of the services, and then as well you can further reinforce that by not even opening the ports at the firewall level. And then here's the option to force encrypted connections, which, as I did point out, if you do have the insecure HTTP port open, it will redirect users to the secure version. So it's kind of a nice convenience. You see in the screenshot here, we do have the box ticked for allow unencrypted connections from an IP address group. It's up to you. I generally would actually not advise doing that, especially if you have a signed SSL certificate. If users are forced to use SSL from outside, might as well force them to use SSL from inside as well. So now let's talk about getting a signed SSL certificate, which is another very important point here that I wanted to emphasize with the presentation, and to give you advice on how you can get one at an inexpensive cost, because you can pay quite a lot for an SSL certificate, or you can get basically the same value with a significantly less cost. So that's one of the main points I want to drive home with the presentation. But just before we get into that, just to talk about the benefits of a signed SSL certificate and why you might want to get one actually validated by a certificate authority. First and foremost, it asserts your identity, so it validates to any connecting person or application that you are in fact who you say you are, and the certificate authority validates that with basically their stamp of approval. And what it means, you see from the screenshot there, is when somebody is connecting securely to your server, they'll get that nice green check mark without any warnings. So basically, they will be assured that they're connecting to the right host and that you don't have some issues with man-in-the-middle attacks or things like that. And similar to the point of asserting your identity, it validates your email domain on the internet. So it, again, further asserts or confirms your identity. And then getting back to one of the original quotes, why am I getting these certificate warnings, which is really probably the biggest benefit of actually obtaining a signed SSL certificate, is to prevent those sort of obnoxious warnings that users get on the client side. So just to cover the high-level steps of installing an SSL certificate, there's a few steps involved even outside of just the configuration of Kerio Connect. In fact, a lot of it is external to Kerio Connect. So step one is to choose the right certification authority. I found recently actually that you can get Komodo SSL certificates or Rapid SSL. They're both trusted by 99% of applications. So you can actually get them through enom.com for like $13 or $14 per year, which is a very reasonable price. So basically for $1 a month, you can get a signed SSL certificate. So for the convenience that it adds and the added level of security, this is something I highly recommend, is to actually obtain a signed SSL certificate. And the steps are really quite straightforward. So once you've selected a certification authority, then you go through the process of getting it signed within Kerio Connect. You can create the certificate request. It's a very straightforward process. There's one kind of slight bit of information you'd need to know. So when you're actually getting it signed by the authority, they'll ask you what format you'd like the certificate in. It's actually okay if you choose the wrong format, because you can always change it later. But PEM format is what Kerio Connect uses. So in other words, it's the same format that Apache uses. So sometimes they might ask you, what web server you have, just say Apache. So there is a question here about Let's Encrypt, and I'm getting, or I've seen rather, some inquiries about it. At this point, I'm still recommending Komodo. $13 a year is almost free. From what I understand, Let's Encrypt issues 90-day certificates, so they're very temporary, and the process of updating your SSL certificate can be somewhat disruptive and somewhat cumbersome. So, I would say that for the minimal expense of a trusted authority, I would definitely still recommend Komodo Rapid SSL. Or whoever you want. But the Let's Encrypt is popular because it's free. But my sort of personal feeling is that a lot of times you get what you pay for. So I'm personally not really in favor of recommending them at this point. I've seen enough bad things, so I would suggest going with a retail option. I think Karsten maybe wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I just want to underline your statement. If something is for free in the internet, who will prevent the bad guys to also get some free SSL certificate? And then you will have, not a really security. So I think you should more trust at the moment. Maybe in 1-2 years we are talking about other things. But as I just would like to underline that, definitely I would go for a well-trusted, well-known certificate authority. We have here in the example Komodo or Rapid SSL. You can also go for Torti or VeriSign or whatever. Those instances and these certificate authorities are basically all already implemented in the operating systems. So you additionally will not have any problems that they may not get validated by the operating system.
Yeah, well, and actually on that point, if you do want a free certificate, Start SSL actually offers free certs in their 1 year. So that's another option. The nice thing about the going through Enom is that well, I mean, first off, $1 a month is practically free, but you can get a certificate that's signed for multiple years. So just the process of renewing a certificate, you know, if you can avoid having to do that on a yearly basis, you know, it's nice. It's like renewing your domain name. It's a little bit of a process involved, and you know, you might as well just get a 2 or a 3 or a 4 year just to kind of avoid the hassle of having to renew it on a somewhat regular basis. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the next step of preparing your certificate. So once you've gone ahead and sent in the certificate request, certificate's been prepared, now you're going to go ahead and download the certificate and install it into Kerio Connect. And this is a very important point because nowadays most CAs have a series certificate chain. So if you were to just import the signed certificate, you would find that there might be errors because it doesn't include the whole certificate chain. So usually the certificate authority will give you some instructions on how to properly assemble the certificate chain and actually give you the download link for the files. But the process is fairly straightforward, and it is documented in our knowledge base. But essentially, it's just a matter of opening up the files and copying and pasting them or appending them to the bottom of the signed certificate that you've received. So, but it's a very important step because if you happen to skip that step, the step what you have to do then to recover is to actually export your private key, then properly reassemble the certificate chain, then re-import the private key with the certificate chain. So I didn't outline those steps because it's a few extra. So I'm trying to make sure you get it right the first time here to prevent having to go through those extra steps. But fortunately, there is a process to recover in case you forget this step number 3. And so you see there the KB 1132. So if you happen to not, or if you're not sure how to do that, you can refer to the knowledge base, and it'll give you more info on how to copy and paste those intermediate certificates into your signed certificate. So now that you've installed the certificate, there's some nice handy online tools that'll help verify that you've properly installed it. So the one I really like is SSLshopper.com. So you see from the screenshot here, you just put in your server address, and then it'll do an online scan and tell you within a few seconds whether you've properly installed the certificate. So this way, you can make sure that it's installed. You don't have to just kind of cross your fingers and hope that no one says that there's some issue with their browser. You can be sure after you install or import the certificate that it's been properly assembled, that you got all the certificate chains set up in there. So I really like this site, and as well, they've got a lot of helpful tools, handy tools that'll show you how to convert a certificate into different formats, and just a lot of learning information because there is a lot to learn with SSL and certificates and PKI. So it's a good learning tool if you want to research it a little bit more. So to further the online scanning that I was just mentioning on the previous slide, you can also do an online scan from Qualys at SSLLabs.com, and they'll do a similar verification check to SSL Shopper, but theirs is significantly more thorough. It's more from a security standpoint. So in addition to making sure that your certificate is properly installed, it's also going to validate the security of your server. So it's making sure that you're current, up to date. So this is, in addition to SSL Shopper, a very good and helpful online assessment. On a default installation, if you've properly installed a signed SSL certificate, you'll get an A-, which is still very secure, and I would say in most cases very good. If you want to actually get a solid A, like you see here, you'll notice I've outlined some steps here that you need to basically disable or enable the disabling of ephemeral DH, and that's something you can do in the configuration file, and the instructions are linked there in KB 1753. So that'll get you from the A- to the A. The implication there is that you might not receive inbound mail from, I believe it's Oracle-based mail servers. So there is a slight possibility that from some domains you may not receive inbound email. So there is somewhat of a cost to getting that A- to an A rating. So for that particular reason, you might want to just stay with the A- rating. So now let's talk about encrypting mail, and this is more from the client side. So everything I was talking about previously were steps you can do on the server side to enforce and to set and install SSL. So now let's talk about how to use SSL from a client side to both encrypt mail and to verify your identity. And so Secure MIME is really the kind of magic component, the magic technology that makes that happen. It's been around for a long time, but I've titled the slide Introducing Secure MIME because I think a lot of people still are unfamiliar to it. So just a quick overview of Secure MIME and really what it's designed to do. So it allows you to sign a message to validate your identity so the recipient knows for sure that you are who you say you are, and then there's a certificate authority that validates your identity so that the recipient can be sure that the email is genuine and actually from the proper sender. And then the second objective of SMIME is to be able to encrypt messages. So if you've shared your public key, your certificate, with other recipients, you can then engage in encrypted communications. So this is certainly important in various industries where you, or even in any company where you're sharing sensitive information and you want to make sure that, that nobody else can have access to that data. And to point out that SMIME is actually supported in many clients, so and natively, not via third-party software or anything like that. So, for example, Outlook on both Windows and Mac do support SMIME. The built-in Apple Mail of Mac OS, iOS devices. For Android, I believe it's not supported in the native email application, but there is a variety of third-party email applications you can use on Android to get that SMIME. And then one of the somewhat recent additions to the web-based Kerio Connect Client was Secure MIME, so you can actually send and receive encrypted messages through the web browser, which is somewhat unique to Kerio Connect Client. A lot of, for example, Gmail, they do not allow that.
I just want to add something for Android. We had this webinar already today at 3 p.m. my time. So somebody pointed out whenever you install a certificate on an Android phone and on Android OS, you then will be forced to use a PIN code on your mobile device, on your Android device. So even if you didn't have a PIN code on your mobile device before, don't be surprised that when you are using SMIME and when you're using and when you're installing a certificate on an Android phone, after that you will be forced by the operating system to activate the PIN code.
Just to have a nice illustration of how SMIME works sort of in action. So you see in the illustration here, Bob sends Alice his certificate, his public key. Then Alice does the same. She sends her public key to Bob. So now that they've both shared their certificates with each other, they can then have encrypted messaging back and forth. So that's just the general workflow of Secure MIME. So we'll talk about how to install a valid digital certificate or email certificate. I've seen several different ways that it's been phrased. Personal certificate, digital certificate, email certificate. I think they're all somewhat kind of the same. So similar to the steps I was showing you previously when you want to install a signed certificate onto the server, the steps are very similar if you're installing the SSL certificate into your email client. So step one, choose a certificate authority. Komodo actually offers a free email certificate that you can use, and I think Karsten's going to show that process in the demonstration. Interestingly enough, the email certificates are slightly more expensive than the server certificates, but roughly about the same price. So $16 per user per year. Now this is direct through Komodo. I wasn't able to find a reseller such as Enom that offers a kind of highly reduced rate. So you would have to go directly to Komodo to get these certificates if you wanted to get them for commercial purposes. Otherwise, if it's for personal use, you can just go through and get a free signed Komodo certificate that validates your email address. And it's good just to at least go through the motions to see the steps involved if before you want to go ahead and actually purchase it for your company. So the way it works is, in this case, you don't actually have to generate a certificate request. That process actually happens through the browser when you go to the site of Komodo. So they do stuff a little bit differently where they actually generate the private key for you, and it kind of gets installed automatically through their site when you go through the process. Basically, it uses your web browser to install the private key into your local operating system. They then send you an email confirming your request, and included in that is a hyperlink. So this is how they sort of validate your identity. It's a very simple email verification check. When you click on the link, it then downloads the public certificate, the signed certificate, into your operating system. The next step is to then export that with the private key so that you then have it sort of in this packaged PKCS or PFX format. And that's what you need. That includes, it's a password protected file that includes both the private key and the public key. And this is what you use to import into your email client application. And again, that's a step that Karsten will show you in the demonstration. So that's the last bit, is getting it, that's one of the last bits, getting that installed into your email application. The last bit is then enabling the option to digitally sign and encrypt messages within the email application. So as I mentioned earlier, Kerio Connect Client can take advantage of SMIME. It was a feature we added somewhat recently into the product. And the process, just to reiterate, is essentially the same. Once you get that PFX formatted file, you can then import it into Kerio Connect Client, and this is a process that Karsten will show during the demonstration. So once you've got that imported, you can then sign all of your outgoing email, and then once the recipient has the message, they can reply to you using encryption. Just to kind of point out, and again, it's reiterated in the knowledge base article there, 1594, but the certificate is installed on your end if you're using Kerio Connect Client once you reply to a digitally signed message. So, and if you already have a contact for that person, it'll associate the certificate with your contact. If you don't have a contact, it will still save the certificate when you reply, but it will save it in a local certificate store that you won't actually see. But the certificate is still there for the user, or for the contact rather. And at that point, and as you see from the image there, you can sign or encrypt messages once you've engaged in that response, or you've replied both with the sender and the recipient. So going back to that illustration of Bob and Alice. So just to quickly summarize everything I went through in the presentation, first and foremost, protect your server. So you want to make sure that you're using encryption. You can even choose an option to enforce that. And then assigning password complexity, make sure that your user accounts cannot become compromised, which could then really hurt your reputation. Protect your identity, so installing a signed SSL certificate and to digitally sign your messages with SMIME. So really validating that you are who you say you are really does go a long way. And then protecting your data using the encryption with SMIME. And of course, that's not something that you don't want to encrypt every single message, but whenever you are sending, and depending on the industry you're in, whenever you're sending sensitive data, you definitely want to make sure that you have the means of using encryption, and SMIME is the way to do that. So I referenced knowledge base articles kind of throughout the presentation just to sort of summarize them here, and we'll actually even show these again afterwards, and you'll have access to the recorded version of this presentation. But just to summarize some of the links and online tools that we referenced, you can see those here, and those online tools as well being sslshopper.com, SSL Labs, and Enom for getting the sort of nice reduced rate of Komodo or rapid SSL certificates. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Karsten now for the demonstration portion of the webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I'm going to switch to the demo part now. I'm going to share my screen. I hope I have cleaned up my machine before, so I will not compromise myself. So I go for sharing, and you should now see the administration interface of a Kerio Connect. So, by the way, after this presentation and webinar, there will be a follow-up email. Brian already mentioned it, and you will also get a link where you can download the presentation. So there's no need now for you to hectically write down the links we were talking about. Just relax and follow the demonstration and the presentation. You can receive all the necessary information afterwards. So what I'm going now to show you is according to the flow Brian has made in his presentation. I'm going to transfer this in the demonstration, and we are starting with the server side. So Brian already mentioned at the beginning that we have now a remote upgrade option in our Kerio Connect server, so there is no problem for you anymore to keep your server up to date. You will find this functionality in the configuration and in the advanced options, and there is a tab which is called software updates. As you can see at the moment, you see nothing. You see not a remote update button. The simple reason for that is that this server is already on 9.0.1, and as there is no newer version at the moment available, you do not see the remote update button. But in case there would be a new version, you just click on the check now, then you would see a remote update option, and you can remotely update without downloading the file before to your local computer. You can update the Kerio Connect server. Next topic Brian was talking about was the enable password complexity. This can be done per domain. So when you have multiple domains in your Kerio Connect, you have to do it for each domain. Where do you do it? As I've already said, you go to configurations, you go to domains, you just do a simple double click on your domain. And then again, there is the security tab. And when I go there, there's a tick box where you can tick user passwords must meet complexity requirements when creating or changing the password. Our complexity requirements we have, let's say, hard-coded into the product, which can be changed when you go into the config file, but we think this is a pretty reasonable complexity requirement. So the typical at least 8 characters, lowercase, uppercase, and it shouldn't be part of the last 3 or 6 times. So additionally, you can also check the box user must change password every given day. We have not ticked it here because we both find it sometimes a little bit nasty when our administrator is pesting us and bombarding us with messages or our server that we now again need to change our password. From the security standpoint, of course, every 180 days changing a password is a good thing. But as you know, we are all humans, so sometimes maybe this is too nasty for somebody. Next thing Brian has shown in his presentation was to enable the login guessing protection, or we call it also internally, and I think that it was also named in the former versions. It is named anti-hammering, which sounds pretty brutal. But you go again for the configuration, you go to security, and in the lower part of this first security policy tab, you see login guessing protection, where you can activate to block IP addresses suspicious of password guessing attacks. Again, here you can make an exclusion for the local clients. It's up to you whether you would like to have it activated or not activated. And additionally, you can also block the user account, which is probably targeted by a password guessing. I think the frame is that when within 1 minute we have 5 or 10 unsuccessful attempts to connect to the server, this account will be blocked for 5 minutes and will be unblocked after 5 minutes again. Next step Brian showed was the require encrypted connection. So I'm just moving my cursor a little bit up, and there you can see require encrypted connection. So when you click on that, you can see there are 3 choices. We are going according to our recommendation for the require encrypted connection. And sorry, Brian, to mention that there are some really rare cases where it is maybe necessary to have an unencrypted connection, and I can see my colleague already laughing in the background. The only exception you should do, or you can do at that point, will be that local clients can use an unencrypted connection. What will be the use case? Maybe you have some old network scanner or scan to mailbox machine, or now please don't laugh, a fax machine which is talking to your network, also to your network. And maybe those ancient products do not have the ability to establish encrypted communication to your mail server. So at that point it may be necessary to make an exception for the local clients. Normally, there is no need for an exception. Next thing Brian was showing was the anti-spoofing protection. So first of all, you need to activate it globally. You find it in the configuration security in the sender policy tab. There you can activate it. Users must authenticate in order to send messages from a local domain. So even the local users need to identify themselves, and you should activate the reject messages with spoofed local domain. Additionally to that point, you have to go again to your domains and you click again on your domain. In our case, it is Wine Brewing. You go to the security tab and again you activate at that point reject messages with spoofed sender identity. Next step Brian showed was that you should definitely deactivate any unsecure services and maybe unnecessary services. So you go to the configuration, go to the services, and there you see a list of all the services Kerio Connect can provide for you. As you can see, we have deactivated all unsecure services except the SMTP service. Brian already mentioned why it is necessary to keep the SMTP service even unsecure running. Just keep in mind that only stopping the service would not be enough, because at the next time when you are maybe need to restart your Kerio Connect, these services will start again because they are normally set to automatic. So do not forget to double click on the service and change the startup behavior from automatic to manually. So then you will be safe that at the next time you are going to restart your server, that this unsecure service will not start. Last but not least for today, and it's for the from the server side, I would quickly show you our SSL certificate. This, for example, is a SSL certificate we have created from Startcom. Just a quick look inside. There you can see the issuer, so the certificate authority. And if you would like to see a source code of a certificate, you can click on the source part of such a certificate, and you will see what is inside a certificate. This is basically all I would like to show you from the server side, just to give you a quick look how such an email can look like if when you are going to get a certificate request for a server certificate. You have an back and forth email contact with the, in that case, Rapid SSL. And at the end, you will receive a mail where you have all the sources and of the certificate and Brian already told you that we have a KB article which is showing that you need to copy and paste this whole chain into a text document, which will then be your certificate you can import into your Kerio Connect server. Otherwise, the chain maybe be broken, but this can easily be checked with the SSL labs from Qualys. Can definitely show you if your certificate chain maybe is broken. So now let's switch over to the SMIME usage in Kerio Connect and with your mail applications. Brian already mentioned the fact about how to obtain an SMIME certificate. For time reasons, I've already prepared one here. You can see it on my desktop. It's the certificate. It's already in the P12 format. And to install this, for example, in the operating system, on your client, on my local machine, on OS 10, it's pretty simple. You just do a double click. And then a dialog is opened. Why I now need to enter some password. This is not the password you're using for the user on this client to protect your certificate against that somebody is abusing it. You need to password protect this certificate. So whenever you're obtaining such a certificate, you also need to provide a password you're using for this. Also, when you're exporting such a certificate, you also need to provide a password. It's for protection. So maybe when this certificate gets, I don't know, somehow stolen, somebody hijacks it with an USB stick in a moment when I'm not at my computer, he cannot do anything with it. He cannot install it on his machine because he doesn't know the password. I'm not typing in the password, and I'm not going to tell you my password. And as you can see, it's pretty simple on OS 10. With a single click, it is now installed here in my Keychain Access application. And now the pretty interesting thing is I'm now closing it and I'm going to reopen Mail. This is just a tip for you. When you have your Apple Mail, for example, already open, because Apple Mail is using certificates which are installed in your operating system itself. When you're going with Microsoft Outlook on Mac, this software has a separate certificate store, so it's not going to use the certificates you have saved in your keychain. This is a separate process, but basically every company which is providing SMIME certificates have also a support and knowledge base where they describe how you can properly import those certificates in the according application. So again, a tip from me, when you have Apple Mail already open, when you installed the certificate, please close it once and reopen it again. And when you're now going to start to write an email, you will immediately recognize this sign here in the upper right corner. This is the indication that this mail will be signed. Brian also mentioned the process for getting an SMIME certificate at, for example, Komodo. So I just would like to quickly show you the page of Komodo. Again, it's some sort of back and forth email traffic you're doing. This is a page from Komodo where you can ask for a free certificate. You say sign up now, and then you're going to specify the things you need for the certificate. You need to provide your first name, last name, the email address you would like to have an SMIME certificate, and of course you need to set a revocation password. Then you will get an email from Komodo, and I can show you this quickly too, which says your Komodo free personal email certificate is now ready for collection. In this email there is a link, you just click on it and then you can collect the certificate. What I already have done is, as I said, preparing the certificate which we now need for our Kerio Connect client. So I'm going here to my Kerio Connect client, and in the upper right corner under your name there is the settings. When you go to the settings, there is another setting here. There is a point here in the settings dialog which is named Secure Messages. You go there, and when you do it the first time, your certificate store will be created for your mailbox. So there is some process, some dialogues you need to confirm, and you need to type in some passwords. But this is also pretty good described in our knowledge base. As I said, my certificate store is already set up and it's password protected. Now I'm going to type in the password. And you may wonder that why I already have a certificate in this store and it is obviously expired. So even if an SMIME certificate has expired, don't throw it away, don't trash it. Because when you do not have this certificate anymore, even if it's expired, you will not be able to decrypt messages which have been signed with this expired certificate. So as you can see, this certificate expired in November 2015. So all mails which have been encrypted before that date, before I created a new certificate, need this certificate to be decrypted. When it's going to start to look a little bit messy in that part of the certificate store, there's also an option that you can download this certificate again, put it at a safe place, and whenever you need to decrypt an email which was signed with this certificate, re-import it again, and then you will be able to decrypt it. But now we are going to import a new, fresh and valid non-expired certificate. So I'm just clicking on the import link, and now I'm going to browse for the certificate. It is here. I do a double click. Again, I need to enter the passphrase, the password I have assigned to this certificate. So I'm going to type it in. And I'm hitting enter. And as you can see, I've typed the wrong password. So we try it again. And as you can see, now the certificate is imported in my Kerio Connect client. The beauty of this thing is that even if you move to another computer and you log into your Kerio Connect client on a different computer, you still will be able to use SMIME and encryption on with your webmail/Kerio Connect client, because this is installed into your, let's say, mailbox under your username on the Kerio Connect server where your mailbox is. So it doesn't matter from which computer you're using it, you can use the Kerio Connect client with signing and encrypting. If you are using different local machines with local applications, you need to import the certificate on each of those local machines. Again, Kerio Connect could be pretty helpful at that point, the Kerio Connect client, because you can go here, as I showed you with the expired one, you can download it and then install it in the application you would like to use. Additionally, those two checkboxes make pretty much sense to be activated. So display decrypted messages directly. That means whenever you get an encrypted email from somebody, you do not need to tick an extra button, please decrypt it. When you have checked this box, it will be automatically decrypted. And of course, as Brian said, you start sharing your certificate by writing signed emails to somebody. You should also tick the box, sign all outgoing messages. I'm saying save here. And now I will switch back to mail. And I'm going to compose a new mail. And as you can see, as I have ticked the box that all my outgoing emails should automatically be signed, you see this signed button here. If I additionally would like to encrypt it, I can tick here encrypt, and I can also, of course, unsign it again if I maybe would like to send an unsigned message. So this is a process how you are doing it on your Kerio Connect client. The last point I would like to show you is how you can do it on a mobile device. And as a mobile device, I'm using an iPhone, so I'm going to monitor my iPhone screen here for the presentation. So basically, to install to configure your iPhone or your iDevice, you see a little link under the login page, under the login form from our Kerio Connect client, which says integration with device. So you just tap on it, and then you are forwarded to the part of the Kerio Connect which says set up my phone. You just tap on the mail, contacts and calendar, and now you can choose whether you would like to continue directly. This will create a CalDAV account for calendar, a CADDAV for contacts, and IMAP for email, or you can choose use Exchange Active Sync instead. It doesn't matter which of those you are choosing. The interesting part comes now, that my phone is crashing, which is perfect. So now what I would like to show you is that on the fly there will be a profile created for your iDevice, and this profile contains the credentials and login information and certificates for your email. And when I go here on more details, you can even see that there will be downloaded the certificate of your Kerio Connect server itself. It will be downloaded your personal S/MIME certificate for decrypting emails and for signing emails. You can see that there is a difference because as we have shown for the Kerio Connect server, it is a certificate from Startcom, and the other one is from Komodo. So you can see here, first one is from the server and the other two are from Komodo.
Carsten, just one question. Were you going to show the, you had the PFX file nicely queued up on your desktop. Did you want to mention the process for how you generated that PFX file?
How you can do it from your OS X system. I will just make it like this. You just have to open Keychain Access. You click on your certificate you would like to export. Then you do a right click on it and say export Carsten at Bindbrewing, and then you can choose the different formats you would like to have. In that case, of course, the P12 because it's personal information exchange. If you need it for your Windows Mobile or Windows system, it is a .cer.
Yes, correct. I think the important distinction is that it needs to include your private key, which that personal information exchange file contains. And that's what you need to import into Kerio Connect Client.